Welcome. You're listening to The Aligned Self, Conversations in Creating a Conscious and Abundant Life. This is Daniel Denovi. I'll be your guide and host. Let's see just where we can take this. Hello, friend, and welcome back to the conversation. Lately, I've been wondering about what to talk about, and I've been overthinking it, second-guessing myself. Mainly because I've been thinking, what do you want to hear? What do you want to listen to? And I've not been coming from my heart. I've done over 350 some episodes, and for the most part, I haven't really considered much about what you want to hear. I ask people, sometimes they send me a question. Can you talk about this? What about this scenario in life? Do you have anything to say about that? And then I take that and I do an episode on it, and more often than not, it applies to a lot of different people. But for me to sit here and think about SEO or about what might be popular, that's not how I operate. And I fell into the trap of wanting to please you. As if I could do that, as if that's in my power. Well, if you listen to my podcast before, you know I end everyone, live your life from inner signals, be inner directed. That is not being inner directed. And so I'm leaning into my intuition, and I'm going to share some wisdom that I've gleaned over the years. And if you're new to the podcast, understand that I'm in my 6th decade of life. I've been on the planet for about 64 years. And I began my spiritual path when I was 13. So I've had a concerted effort towards evolving my mind and being on the spiritual path for 50 years. And because I'm human, I've made a lot of mistakes. I've made just about every mistake that you can make as a human being in relationship, in success and failure, and you name it. And I used to be reticent about sharing or displaying my humanity, that I had failings. And that was only because I was insecure. I thought if I was to have any credibility as a coach, as a teacher, I had to show that I was perfect, that I had it all figured out, that I had all the answers. Well, I do have a lot of answers. I don't have them all. But I also have many more questions. And like you, I have good days and bad days. I have days where I'm spot on and days where it's really hard to get the mind in gear. That's part of the human condition. And so what's interesting is, as I said that, I realized that this podcast is going to be different than I originally thought it was going to be. So we won't even talk about what I thought it was going to be. What it's going to be about is some of the inevitable truths that you'll have to encounter or deal with as a human being while you're engaged in the epic adventure. Now, the epic adventure is your life. You are a spiritual being immersed in the human experience. That is the adventure of the spirit. So along this journey, there are things that if you can get them early, if you can realize them early, it's going to alleviate a host of emotional upsets. And that is, first and foremost, there's no such thing as a perfect human being. There's no way you can be perfect. You're fallible. We are all fallible. Perfectionism is actually a subpersonality that is created, or let's say the wanting for perfection, to be perfect or to have high standards for yourself, is typically a reflection of the fact that you had critical parents, where no matter how good you did at something, you could always do better. Yeah, that was pretty good. You came in second place, but why didn't you come in first place? Really, I could tell you kind of let up in the final stretch there. And that causes us to think there's something wrong with us. In order to be accepted and gain love, we need to be perfect. Well, there's no such thing. Our parents were certainly not perfect. The other way perfectionism comes into being is when we have parents that have a difficult time emotionally regulating. Like, they're not in control of their emotions. We don't necessarily know what we're going to walk into. And so we take on the persona that we are going to be the good boy or the good girl. We're going to be perfect. Our behavior is going to be perfect in order to manage the emotional life of our parents. Well, that's not our job. We don't have the skill set. We don't have the bandwidth. We do not have all the resources to manage another human being's emotional life. So one of those lessons is you are responsible for you and you alone. Now, you can take other people's emotions into consideration, but do not modify your communication. Do not modify your truth in order to fit somebody else's expectation, because then you are not living your life. You're actually living somebody else's idea of what your life should be. I've talked a lot about manifesting, law of attraction, but you cannot create the life you want when you're giving up responsibility for your wants and needs and actions based on the acceptance of other people. And I can raise my hand, and I lived that for a long time. I can remember I was at SMI, Success Motivation Institute, when I was 19 years old. They were based in Waco, Texas. I came to Texas when I was 19, and I actually looked at being a representative for their work. Well, they did a personality assessment, and they said that I was off the charts on all these things, except that I tended to put other people's goals, wants, and needs ahead of my own, and that could be problematic. And at first I wondered, how did they assess that from the questionnaire that I took? Well, it must have been in the answers or how I frame things. And I pick up a lot of stuff like that today with very little information. It's easy to see. There's only a few patterns that human beings exhibit. And one of those is being a people pleaser or trying to please others, to fit in, to go along with the crowd, to not stick your head out. And like it or not, the majority of people on the planet are invested in looking good. They're invested in receiving the good esteem of others. They modify their behavior. They modify their choices. They're not necessarily exhibiting what they want truly for their life because they're afraid of the judgment of other people. Well, that, my friend, will imprison you because you'll never, ever truly be yourself according to your own inner guidance until you can give up needing to be accepted by others. It's always nice. It's always nice to have other people admire you, to welcome you into their home and invite you into their conversations. But you can't please everybody. You don't like everybody. Yet we have this little program in the back of our mind that we want everybody to like us. Well, I'm sorry. It took me a long time to realize it, well into my 30s, before I began living my life according to my own inner signals. Actually not giving two toots about what other people, not giving a fuck about what other people want or what they think. Now, that sounds really cavalier, and there's even a book on about doing that. And a lot of people will be on social media and say, I don't give, about what other people think. I just saw someone on social media the other day. They said, I don't give two fucks about what anybody else thinks. Well, that's not true. Otherwise, they would not be on social media. They would not be doing a live. Don't lie to me. And to be truthful, the people that really don't consider other people, they don't really, they totally don't care what other people think. They're a sociopath. They will steal from you, take from you, hurt you, with no remorse because, frankly, they don't care about you. And so to be a well-invested human being, where you want to sit in that category is that ultimately you want it to default to your own inner guidance. But you want to also consider the impact on other people, especially those people that you love. But when push comes to shove, you decide in favor of what's going on internally in your heart. And the other people in your life will just have to deal with your truth. Because if on the flip side of it, and this was the big realization for me, If you change your behavior in order to fit somebody else, in order to pacify somebody else, in order to manage their emotions and manage their response, that is manipulation. You are manipulating the conversation. You are manipulating the truth. You are telling white lies in the guise of not wanting to hurt somebody else's feelings. Well, in truth is you don't want them to be upset at you based on your opinion or based on your point of view. And so you'll tell a little white lie, or you won't tell the whole truth. You won't be totally forthcoming because you don't want to upset the apple cart. That is self-protection. That is manipulation. And when you don't put the full truth out to people, then you do not give them the opportunity to interact with you truthfully. When I was in my late teens, I came across Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the very top of the pyramid is self-actualization. Now, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. It seemed kind of out of my reach to arrive at a point of self-actualization, to arrive where you're accessing all your potential and you're operating at the upper limits of your capacity or what's possible for you. Some of the people that were paraded around as examples to be self-actualized: Albert Einstein, Albert Schweitzer, Benjamin Franklin. Now, I have to admit, over the years, my conception or my definition of self-actualization has changed over the years. In fact, I'm still refining it right now, so I'm not going to actually talk about it today, but it's essentially being all you can be. As part of that, we have to live from inner signals. We have to be inner directed. We have to live life according to our own terms. And that's why intuition is so important, tapping into your intuitive guidance. All of us have a North Star, a compass that points north all the time. But because we're taught to second guess our needs, to second guess what we think in order to fit in order to appease other people, then we tend to quiet this intuitive voice, even to the point where we don't necessarily trust it. And that becomes the big challenge as an adult. Once we become more aligned with becoming the person we want to be, we have to learn how to tune in, how to trust our own inner guidance. But once we get it, once we can differentiate the differences between an intention of our ego and an intention from spirit or an intention from our higher self, and we begin aligning our life according to the wants and wishes of our higher self, aligning with Source, God is all that is, this is when your life really begins to take off. Because when we're aligned with the intention or the wants of the ego, generally the ego wants to be appreciated, wants to be recognized, wants accolades. And so we tend to do things to stand out, or it's not inner directed. It's in order to receive acceptance outside of us, to have other people applaud. Look how wonderful you are. I resisted greatly up until my early 20s of aligning with Source, because I figured I would have to do missionary work. I would have to do something I wouldn't want to do, that my life would not be mine. Well, the thing is once I actually gave in and I surrendered to God, Goddess, all that is, surrendered to Source, that's when my life really took off. That's when synchronicity really came into being. And I have never been asked by Source to do something that I did not enjoy wanting to do. In fact, most of the trials and tribulations that I've experienced is undoing all the things that I created or intended because I was seeking external validation. And in that process of wanting external validation, other people's accolades, other people's acceptance, we create structures, relationships, jobs, projects that are not necessarily aligned. This goes back to trying to manipulate other people. We build structures where other people are invested in our lie, invested in our half-truth, because we didn't have the courage to actually say, that's not what I really want. We go along with the program, and we tend to resent it. If you have the feeling, and I got to this point when I was in my late 20s, of wanting to run away, like I wish I could just leave go to another city. Nobody knows me. Then I could be anything that I want. I could have a fresh start. I could be anything that I want. You can be anything that you want right now where you are. You just have to have the courage to say, this is who I am. And ultimately, I'm not here to please you. I don't care if you accept me or don't accept me. And they may not accept you. And that's a clear indication of if you start showing your truth, if you set a boundary, it's key in setting boundaries, in deciding who you are, where you end and the other person begins. People that are into people-pleasing have weak boundaries. But if you start to establish boundaries, if you start to, espouse your truth and other people don't like it, they don't accept it, I'm telling you, they are not your people. And if the only way you can keep them around is by being something you're not, then you are doing yourself a great disservice. You're not helping anybody. Now, this brings me to another realization that I've had along the way. I used to think confidence was all that I needed to have confidence, that I didn't necessarily have the confidence that I needed to stand out, to show up, to be in conversations, to be the guy in the room, the person that could do a podcast, to actually teach others. I used to think that I needed the confidence. Well, confidence comes from actually doing stuff. It's knowing that you can do stuff. And after a while, you try enough things and you have a relatively, successful run. More often than not, you get a desired result. Then you start to have confidence in your ability to actually show up. But until then, what's really needed is courage. And courage is a relationship with fear. It's feeling the fear and doing it anyways. Courage is the slap in the face of fear. In fact, courage is not even possible without fear being present. Now, I thought a lot about courage, especially in my mid to late 20s, because that's when I first started firewalking. And the promise is that I would gain unstoppable confidence in walking across the hot coals. Well, I walked across the hot coals on January 30th of 1988, and on January 31st, I still had fear. I did not have the confidence. In fact, I was confident that the fire just wasn't all that hot, that it was a fluke or, there was something wrong with it. I discounted the total experience. Well, over the next 20 years, I probably walked another dozen times, and I began to realize that it is not the process of walking across hot coals that's the big deal. That's not the confidence builder. It's not the confidence, because I had done it several times. I'd seen other people do it. I knew it was possible. The big deal about firewalking and doing anything that's scary is, how do you know when you're ready to take the first step? What does it take to take the first step? It takes courage. It takes faith. It takes aligning with your own inner signals, listening to your inner guidance. So if you don't feel you have the confidence yet, don't worry. Engage in being courageous. And being courageous is just feeling the fear and doing it anyways, and figuring it out as you go. I love the quote from Scent of a Woman. If you get tangled up doing the tango, you simply tango out of it. This goes back to what I said earlier, is that there's no such thing as being perfect. And that brings me to another realization, is that is part of having a fantastic life, the epic adventure, is developing a relationship with failure, a relationship with fear. Now, a lot of people say, I fear failure. Why? You failed time and time again, especially when you were first learning to walk. That was probably the big upsets. You kept falling on your butt over and over and over again, but you kept getting up. Seen most of you walk around the room. You conquered the impossible, because when you were first rolling around on the floor like a little worm and barely able to get yourself up on all fours and crawl around the floor, the first time you pulled yourself up, you fell fairly soon. And so confidence is gained in the doing. Now, there is no such thing as failure, really. When you're playing the infinite game, when you're in it for the long run, you may not get the result you first set out on. You might reach disappointment. But if you use that information as feedback to adjust your course, to do something different, to adopt a new strategy, then it's all a process of learning. There is no such thing as failure. It's all learning. But why do we fear rejection? Because we think we need to be perfect. We think we need to have it all figured out. We think if we fail, if we don't get the result we want, then other people will think that we're weird or there's something wrong with us. Now, as I've shared before, I came across a quote when I was 13, when I was in the consideration of what does potential mean? Because I was told by 2 or 3 people that I had a lot of potential, but they could not tell me in an adequate definition of what that actually meant. It did not resonate with me, so I kept asking the question, what is potential? What is potential? Well, I came across a quote in a book, The Ultimate Athlete. And when I opened up that page, this quote, this paragraph, it was exactly what I was looking for. It said, the ceiling to your potential is built the moment you say, I can't. And in that moment, I had a full body cascade event known as an aha experience. I got it. It made sense to me. I got to say. I determined what the ceiling to my potential was. I decided how high I was willing to go, how hard I was willing to work. It was not given by external feedback, external validation. I determined. I'm responsible. I'm response-abled on my journey towards self-actualization, to be all I can be, to develop a life of meaning. Before it was even called a thing, I had the growth mindset. And it was when I was in my early 20s that I came across a quote, the mind is like a garden. When you're growing, you're green. When you're not, you're rotting. And so I began reading everything. I began buying cassette tapes, cassette programs. Today we have YouTube videos, online trainings. We didn't have that when I was younger. Information was not that accessible. There was a company called Nightingale Conant, and they put out recorded audios, experts in the field, and you could listen, and it was essentially a book on tape. Most of the programs were 6 to 9 hours long, and I spent $60 to $70 a month on a new program each and every month. And then I would listen to them over and over and over again. And then after a time, the public library, would stock books on tape. I could check them out. And don't tell anyone, I actually copied many of those so I could listen to them again and again and again. And I did. Everywhere I drove, I didn't listen to the radio for the most part. I listened to informative teaching lessons. And that's probably why I'm attracted to the medium of the spoken word, the medium of podcasting. And I've been in the consideration that perhaps I need to do a video podcast to have it on YouTube, because it's a greater reach. A lot of people listen. I listen to a lot of podcasts on YouTube. So why don't I? Well, my podcasts are on YouTube, but it's audio only. So it doesn't quite have the same feeling that a video podcast would have. Now, I don't watch the podcast by and large. For the most part, I just listen on YouTube. So all that to say, what I learned was to feed my mind. To become better, there's skill acquisition. Now, one of the things that I learned is there's only 3 things you need to accomplish anything. That is the how to, want to, and chance to. To say it another way, it is the motive, means, and opportunity. So you have to have the desire to do something. If you don't have the desire, you won't clean your room, you won't do anything. You won't even go out to eat. You won't get off the couch to go to the bathroom until you really have to go. And by that time, the desire is intense, and a wild team of horses could not keep you away. Now, you might have the desire, but you don't have the know-how. So the know-how or the skill level is important. In fact, not knowing stops a lot of people. They have the desire, maybe they want to be a millionaire, maybe they want to start their own business, but they don't have the know-how. Well, the good news is that other people can teach you. There's coaches, there's teachers, there's YouTube, there's all these other programs, online courses. You have access to a greater degree than at any other time in history to the know-how to figure things out. There are more than enough experts that you have access to that many people never had access to earlier, let's say 10, 20 years ago. You can figure anything out. You can learn anything. And if you can't learn it, if it's beyond your scope, beyond your capacity, then you can hire somebody, partner with somebody, align with somebody else that has the know-how. You don't have to know yourself. You just have to have access to the knowledge, access to the know-how. So we have desire, motive, means, the how-to, and opportunity, the chance to. I usually say you can't be a Broadway actor living in Peoria, Illinois. In order to be a Broadway actor, my friend, you have to go to Broadway. And so once you have everything aligned, you have all three missing components. You have the desire. The desire is fervent. In fact, if you have nothing but a fervent desire, you can figure the other stuff out. But if you have the know-how, if you have the opportunity, but you don't have the desire, nothing will happen. The good news is that if you have an inkling, and maybe you don't have a real strong desire, you can feed the fire. Okay, this episode ended up going a little over an hour. Actually, an hour and 11 minutes, 1:11. So I decided to break it up into 3 parts to make it more digestible and easier to listen to. So you just completed part 1 of 3 parts. Continue on to the next episode to continue with my 50 years of wisdom. Until next time, this is your friend and host, Daniel Danovi, urging you to follow your bliss. Live your life from inner signals, be inner directed as you engage in the epic adventure.